There we go. Okay, on a couple of minutes early here. Trying to get everything just set up and ready to go here. YouTube's being a little bit of a pain in the butt for me. So appreciate appreciate you folks tuning in. Let me make sure I put it out there on social media and whatnot, so that everyone knows to tune in. I'm Jason Griefer. Welcome to Fumblegate and an impromptu edition. I know myself and Adam normally like to give you more regular material, but life gets in the way and what have you, and so good to have you with us. The reason why I decided to do the stream here tonight is for a very interesting bit of news that broke today. It was announced earlier today via social media. If you follow the Arizona Cardinals Twitter, they put out a video of, I believe it's team president Michael Bidwell, FaceTiming Carson Palmer and telling him, exchange pleasantries and what have you. And then all of a sudden they say, hey, Carson, we're going to induct you into our Ring of Honor. And Carson seemed rather flabbergasted. Cardinals are pretty excited about it. Just finish putting this on Facebook, facebook.com/fumblegate, by the way. So make sure you're giving us a check out there on the Facebook, Twitter. That stuff's scrolling at the bottom of the screen here. And so anyway, back to the point. Carson Palmer has been told today he will be inducted into the Arizona Cardinals Ring of Honor. Now, if you followed football for a long time, you know the Arizona, Phoenix, St. Louis, Chicago Cardinals have never really been much to shake a stick at. Never have really been much in the way of making noise anywhere in football, and if so, it's for the wrong reasons. We saw them about a decade ago get to a Super Bowl with Kurt Warner and should have won the game, but Pittsburgh wound up beating them. But anyway, back to the point here. Carson Palmer is going in the Arizona Cardinals Ring of Honor. I believe he's the 18th or the 19th person to go into the Ring of Honor, just the third quarterback. He'll join Hall of Famer Kurt Warner there, and I think it'll be the only type of honor in which those two are together, because I do not see a place in Canton for Carson Palmer, and I think it would be kind of hard to make a case for him given the ups and downs of his career, the lack of playoff success. Not necessarily all of that is his fault. Cincinnati Bengals fans would remember in the 2005 going into the 2006 playoffs. A lot of people thought that Cincinnati was a Super Bowl contender, and then Carson Palmer had his knee taken out by Kimo von Oelhoffen, so it didn't happen. This news today, and it's the reason why I wanted to come on and have a chat. It is very, very strange that this is happening for Carson. And by the way, let me know your thoughts on this in the chat. It is open if you want to talk about it. This is very strange, and it makes me wonder where we're headed as a league in the NFL. Is this something that's going to carry over into other sports? It is very baffling. And I'm going to give you some reasons why here. Carson Palmer played a grand total of 60 games with the Arizona Cardinals over 5 seasons. 60. 38 wins, 21 losses, 1 tie. He was only the quarterback in the playoffs for one season, 2015, won a game, lost in the NFC title game to Carolina. Let me go through the numbers of Carson Palmer, and you tell me what this says more about him, the Arizona Cardinals, sports in general. Here we go. Carson Palmer played in Arizona from 2013 to 2017, and I'm going to go year by year giving you his numbers, and you tell me if this is somebody that should be honored like this. And there's a lot of other points I'm going to get into as we go along here, but this is one that is, again, this is baffling. Here we go. 2013, his first year there after being traded from Oakland for a 6th-round pick. You could say that worked out in Arizona's favor. Anyway, 2013, his first year there, they finished 10-6, do not make the playoffs. He has 24 touchdowns and 22 interceptions. 24 touchdowns, 22 picks. But they finished 10-6 anyway. Imagine where they would have been had he not thrown 22 interceptions. 2014 is a weird year. The team finishes 11-5. He only goes 6-0 because in the second week of November, he tears his ACL. He went 6-0 starts, threw for just over 1,600 yards, 11 touchdowns, 3 picks. Now, this is an interesting point here in 2014. As I said, he went 6-0. The team still got to the playoffs and won 11 games with Drew Stanton and Ryan Lindley filling in for Palmer. So, again, you can wonder on that team where they would have been had Carson not torn his knee, or you could look at it the other way and say, well, they still won 11 games and got to the playoffs with Drew Stanton and Ryan Lindley. Was Carson really that big of a factor that they still won 11 games without him and got to the playoffs without him? You could go either way on that. 2015. Now, this is his best year in an Arizona uniform, and some people believe he could have been the MVP of the league. The Cardinals go 13-3. He sets a franchise record with 4,671 yards, 35 touchdowns, and 11 interceptions. 35-11. He goes to the Pro Bowl. His lone Pro Bowl in a Cardinals uniform. They lose in the NFC Championship game. He did do something that he wasn't able to do, and neither was Marvin Lewis in Cincinnati in 2015. He won a playoff game. But 2015 was his personal only playoff appearance in a Cardinals uniform. So again, that year, 13-3, beg your pardon, almost 4,700 yards, 35 touchdowns, 11 picks. Goes to the Pro Bowl. Could have been the MVP. Things fall off in 2016. Injuries catch up. Again, this was a recurring issue with him in Arizona. 2015 was really only his healthy year. You could maybe say 2013, but at the same time, he was trying to unlearn everything he went through in Oakland. So he did throw 22 picks that year. 2016, as a starter, he goes 6-8-1, 4,200 yards, 26 touchdowns, 14 interceptions, and 14 fumbles. 14 fumbles in 15 starts. 14 starts, beg your pardon. 14 fumbles in 14 starts, 14 picks in 14 starts. So you extrapolate that out, he's basically good for 2 turnovers a game that year, despite the fact he threw for over 4,000 yards. 2017, which would be his final year before hanging it up. The team goes 8-8. He only plays 7 games. He goes 3-4. Missed the last 9 games of the year, broke his arm. Almost 2,000 yards, 9 touchdowns, 7 picks. That's the totality of Carson Palmer's career. Overall, 38 wins, 21 losses, 1 tie. And in the playoffs, as a starter, he was 1-1. Overall, for his 5 years in Arizona, 16,782 yards, 105 touchdowns, 57 interceptions, 31 fumbles. And this is enough for the Arizona Cardinals Ring of Honor. Now, you can go back and look and say, well, Kurt Warner only played there 5 years, and he's in their Ring of Honor. Kurt Warner, as I said before, is in Canton. Kurt Warner was an MVP before he got to Arizona. We saw what he did with the Greatest Show on Turf in St. Louis. We tend to overlook the disaster that was his tenure in New York. Kind of similar paths that Palmer and Warner run. They start one place. Palmer starts in Cincinnati, plays 7 of his seasons in Cincinnati, gets really good really quickly, starts winning ball games. Things slowly go south. He moves on, goes to Oakland, where it's a disaster every single year, and 2019 is not going to be any different. They're hoping maybe Vegas changes their luck. And then he finds a second true home in Arizona and does what he does. Same kind of thing with Kurt Warner. As I said, kind of gets a little beat up in St. Louis. Mark Bulger eventually supplants him. He goes to New York. It's a chance at a career revival. Eventually loses his job to Eli Manning, who sadly will be in the Hall of Fame and shouldn't be. And then has a renaissance out in Arizona. And Palmer's numbers are better across the board in the 5 years that he was there compared to Kurt Warner's 5 years. Kurt Warner got his team to a Super Bowl, though. Carson Palmer did not. The first 3 years in Arizona, 10, 11, and 13 wins, and can't get his team to a Super Bowl. Kurt Warner got his team to a Super Bowl, as we talked about before. Carson Palmer finishes his run in Arizona with the best winning percentage in franchise history at .642. He is, as I said, the third quarterback in the Ring of Honor. Kurt Warner's one. The other one, you probably would not have any idea who it is, and I had to do some research on this to find out who it was myself. His name is Jim Hart, and you may not know that name. Not a lot of people do. First of all, he was there with the Cardinals franchise from 1966 to 1983 while the franchise was still in St. Louis. This was before they'd even moved to Arizona and became the Phoenix Cardinals, now the Arizona Cardinals. But he was there for 17 years. It's hard to gauge as far as numbers go because the game was not the passing type of game it has been the last 20 years through Kurt Warner's tenure and then Carson Palmer's and even to what we have now in 2018 and 2019. So you look at that and say, well, 17 years as your quarterback, you could see why the Cardinals would give him that honor, even though nobody has tied any kind of success to the Cardinals franchise by and large. I think their most successful run as a franchise was when they started out when they were the Chicago Cardinals. Don't ever recall through the 60s and the 70s and in the 80s when the St. Louis Cardinals were of anything of note in the NFL. But again, 17 years as your quarterback, any franchise is going to honor somebody like that with a Ring of Honor. If said franchise has a Ring of Honor, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But I want to get back to Carson Palmer. A very up and down career. And the thing that gets me also, one little tidbit, this is fun, and Cincinnati fans, and I say that because I live and I'm broadcasting in the Cincinnati area, so I'm very familiar with this. Carson Palmer is tied for 7th all-time with 22 pick sixes. Any Bengals fan will have bad memories of that. Any Raiders fan will have bad memories of that. Any Cardinals fan will have bad memories of some of the terrible pick sixes Carson Palmer has thrown. And let me say, the Bengals teams with Carson Palmer on it, by and large, were fun to watch. And some people may look at this and say, well, Jason, you're just bitter that Carson Palmer left the Bengals. And growing up, following the Bengals and knowing how they are, and I've talked to people privately about this, never really on the air. I think we may have done it on a previous episode of Fumblegate. Myself and Adam might have touched on it. I completely understand and understood where Carson Palmer was coming from when he decided to demand a trade or he would retire. He had produced for the Bengals immediately Drafted number 1 in '03, rode the bench for a year. '04, the Bengals go 8-8. '05, they go 11-5, and you're thinking Cincinnati has struck gold. They found their next franchise quarterback. But then the problems start to happen, as they do with any kind of thing relating to Mike Brown and the Bengals. Things fall apart, and Carson Palmer wants changes, and he bet on himself against one of the most stubborn owners in sports history. Lost the battle. But again, if you've watched Cincinnati football or know anything about Cincinnati Bengals football, at least in my time, what you got out of Carson Palmer, you ought to be appreciative of it. And I say that because I had to go through the 1990s of seeing only 8 Bengals games a year, all of them on the road, because the 1990s, the Bengals did not sell out at home games, and back then, the blackout rule was still a thing. You had to sell a certain amount of tickets to be able to have home games broadcast in the local market. So for a lot of the 90s, most people that followed Bengals football could only see them on the road or had to go to like a bar or something and hope that they had a satellite broadcast of it. And even generally, that didn't happen. So I completely understood where Carson Palmer was coming from. Yeah, it was a little bit of a sting seeing that, the best thing to happen to the franchise since 1990 didn't want to play here anymore in Cincinnati. But again, I totally understood it. And he bet on himself, as I said, against one of the most stubborn owners in sports history. And he lost, and he was gone. So he's gone. That's not the point, though. So again, it's not a diatribe about being mad at Carson Palmer for wanting out of Cincinnati. You look at this run in Arizona, and again, 5 years. He played 60 games regular season, 2 in the playoffs. Okay, 62 regular season games, 62 total games. And that's enough to be honored in the Ring of Honor. By the way, the Bengals don't have any kind of Ring of Honor. They have some BS Hall of Fame thing on their website, but that's it. No, nobody's really celebrated for like number retirements, like Anthony Munoz, the Bengals' lone Hall of Famer in the 52 years of the franchise, does not have his number retired and should have the minute he retired from football. There's a whole litany of other things. You can look at some past episodes we've done on Fumblegate, both here on YouTube and also on Facebook. And Adam Keefe can tell you a lot of the details as far as the dysfunction with Mike Brown. It even goes to this year when they hired Zach Taylor as the head coach. Mike Brown, by all accounts, wanted Hugh Jackson as the head coach, and the rest of his family talked him into Zach Taylor. Anyway, back to Carson Palmer in Arizona. I'm looking at this, and I'm thinking, 5 years, you got to be kidding me. To be honored as one of your all-time greats. And again, I get the Kurt Warner comparison because they were there the exact same number of years. Kurt Warner's Hall of Famer. You want to tie yourself to a Hall of Famer. Carson Palmer is not getting into Canton. He'll get some votes along the way, I'm sure. But he'll come up nowhere near the required amount to get in and get the gold jacket. And you look at the rest of the franchise, and again, the Cardinals, by and large, for a lot of their existence, have been a joke of a franchise. One of the worst in the National Football League. By and large. Occasional runs here and there. Carson Palmer's run, a few years with Kurt Warner. But beyond that, when's the last time you heard anything about the Cardinals doing anything in a positive light? It doesn't come up very often. But you have a lot of people bringing up points, and very valid points, that how can you honor Carson Palmer ahead of a guy, for example, I don't know, probably the second best wide receiver in franchise history, in Anquan Boldin? Let me give you some of the context with Anquan Boldin. Now, he played 7 years in Arizona. So you may think, well, whoop-de-doo, 2 more seasons. Let me give you some of his numbers. 7 years in Arizona, he has 5 1,000-yard seasons, 7,500 yards, 44 touchdowns. Now, while you might think 7,500 yards over 7 years, that's not even 1,100 yards a year. Well, again, besides he and Larry Fitzgerald, name me another good Cardinals wide receiver. Name one. Let me give you some of the quarterbacks that were throwing to Anquan Boldin during his time in Arizona. And maybe you'll appreciate more how great he was for that Cardinals franchise before they let him go. Here we go. These are by and large. There's a couple of guys I think I left off because they played very little regular season. We know about Kurt Warner. Kurt Warner kind of came in as Bolton was kind of heading out of Arizona. So Kurt Warner. Matt Leinart. Josh McCown. The ageless one. I think the only name that surprised me that wasn't on this list was Ryan Fitzpatrick, because he's played for seemingly everybody. But that's not the case, at least in Arizona. Sean King. Remember that name? Do you remember him as an Arizona Cardinal? No, you don't. You may remember him as a Tampa Bay Buck. You don't remember him as an Arizona Cardinal. He was throwing balls to Anquan Boldin. Anquan Boldin was racking up yardage and touchdowns with Sean King throwing it to him. John Navarre. Yep. John Navarre. Think about that. And I saved the last one just because it's funny. And again, you wouldn't associate this guy with being an Arizona Cardinal because he was known for what he did elsewhere. Shakin' Blake. Jeff Blake. Oh, yeah. You didn't remember he was an Arizona Cardinal either, did you? No. You remember him from the Bengals of the 90s. The one decent season Cincinnati had in the 90s was in 1995 when they went 8-8. And it was Jeff Blake throwing bombs to Carl Pickens each and every week. That's the only thing you remember Jeff Blake from. You don't remember him as an Arizona Cardinal. So, Jeff Blake, Josh McCown, Sean King, Matt Leinart, John Navarre, Kurt Warner. These are the guys that Bolden is catching balls from and still putting up 5 1,000-yard seasons and 44 touchdowns before he is booted. And heads on off to Baltimore, I believe. So again, think about that. Palmer had a lot more talent around him. Not saying he didn't put up the numbers himself. You got to be good to put up some of the numbers he did. You also have to be Carson Palmer to put up some of the other numbers that he did, such as 22 interceptions in 2013, 2016, 14 interceptions, 14 fumbles. Tied for 7th all-time with 22 pick sixes, and not all those were in a Cardinals uniform. He damn sure threw some for Cincinnati. Bengals fans remember that well. And sure he threw some for Oakland, although I don't know if he was ever truly interested out while he was out there in Oakland, except for, the first when he got traded there, he got to play for Hugh Jackson, who was a coach with the Bengals before he wanted out. So again, Anquan Boldin, not honored by the franchise before Carson Palmer is. It makes you wonder. You're going to put Carson Palmer alongside Kurt Warner, Aeneas Williams, the late Pat Tillman, Dan Deerdorf, several other guys who names escape my memory right now, and I don't have the full list in front of me. And you're going to say he is on their level. Again, Carson can only do what Carson can do, but man. And it makes you wonder going forward. What are the Arizona Cardinals going to do when Larry Fitzgerald finally retires? We believe it's going to be this season. We believe 2019 will be his last. What are they going to do when he decides, I'm done? Does he hang it up after 2019? Or does he like playing with Kyler Murray and Quaff Bro Cliff Kingsbury so much that he wants to stick around for another year or two and maybe play till he's 40? He probably could. The dude's a athletic specimen. He's an absolute freak of an athlete. But it makes you wonder, if Carson Palmer is considered on the level of some of those other guys I just mentioned, what are they going to do when Larry Fitzgerald says, I'm done? Are they going to build a statue? They should. Are they going to retire his number? I don't even know if Arizona does that. I think they do. To be honest, they should already. He's the best player in Cardinals franchise history. They're going to rename the field after him? Like, I'm trying to think of things that they could possibly do to separate Larry Fitzgerald from Carson Palmer amongst Cardinals elite players. You give a piece of ownership? Do you give him the franchise? Does the Bidwell family say, we think so much of you, Larry? Here's the franchise? What else do you do for the guy? He has been the one constant throughout this run of the last decade when the Arizona Cardinals actually get some national attention. And they're not just considered an also-ran and a W in the column for their opponents. By and large. I don't know. I just don't know. It makes me wonder if this is also where we're heading in sport. This is to honor a guy as one of your greats. Overall, it says that the Cardinals franchise as a whole, all the way back into the 40s and 30s and 40s, I believe, when they first started as the Chicago Cardinals, has been a pretty awful franchise. I mean, think about it. They've been around more than 50 years. I think more than 70 years, maybe close to 80 years now. 3 quarterbacks they have in their Ring of Honor. It'll be Carson Palmer. It'll be Kurt Warner, Hall of Famer. And it will be Jim Hart, who was their quarterback for 17 years. And based on that alone, gets honored. Go back and look at some of the players they've had over the history of the franchise. Not very many good ones for a long, long, long time. You remember when Emmitt Smith was an Arizona Cardinal? I'm sure he'd like to forget. I'm guessing the only thing that he appreciates from the Arizona Cardinals is the boost in his bank account. But as I said, it makes me wonder where we're going as a sport. How much do accomplishments really mean? How much of a standard are we going to hold our athletes to? Now, I know it's not necessarily all his fault that he only played 5 years in Arizona. Thought he was going to stick around in Cincinnati for his career. Had signed a massive extension. Things didn't work out there. Goes to Oakland. That's a complete disaster. Then gets traded again. So it's not all on him. But if you're going to honor a guy for giving you 5 decent years, again, 2015, you could make the argument he could have been the MVP of the league. He was certainly in the discussion. 4,600 yards, 35 touchdowns, 11 picks. They went 13-3. That's a damn good year, and in a lot of years, that could win you an MVP. I don't remember who the MVP was in 15. I can't remember off the top of my head, and I don't have it on my notes here. So I haven't spent time to type up some notes here to make sure I don't remember, make sure I don't forget some of this stuff. 2 pages. worth. It's in large font, so it's not really 2 pages. But this is bordering, in some ways, we're getting closer to the participation trophy award. That if you were not a bust of a draft pick, that you're going to be remembered fondly. And for some franchises in their Ring of Honor. Like, what kind of standards do the Arizona Cardinals have? That he's going in to the Ring of Honor. He only led him to the playoffs once. Now, I know they made it, as I said, they made it in 2014. But he was hurt. Tore his ACL. They finished the year with Drew Stanton and Ryan Lindley. You remember those guys. Legends. Drew Stanton, Michigan State, I believe. Ryan Lindley, I don't have a clue where he went to college. But again, 2015 is the only year that he took them to the playoffs. And they lost in the NFC title game. What? That's the standard. That's the benchmark now for the Cardinals. He got us into the playoffs. Let's put him up on the wall. Nope, can't necessarily say that because we can't do it for Anquan Bolden. I don't know. It's very, very confusing. And again, it's getting closer to the, as I said, the participation trophy. That if you didn't totally suck as a player for said franchise, apparently 5 years is all you need. And you play in the playoffs, you're going to be honored by, you can be honored by some team as an all-time great. At the same time, you could look at the other foot and say, well, at least the Cardinals honor their past. There are a few teams that don't, in any way, shape, or form. Cincinnati is at the top of the list. Cincinnati doesn't do a damn thing to honor its past. Oh, I'm sorry. They did 2 seasons ago, the 50th anniversary, they occasionally trotted out some of the old-timers at halftime of some of the games that 25,000 people showed up to. Which is a shame. But and you could very much argue that the Bengals and the Cardinals are very similar as far as the modus operandi in their franchises. The Bidwells and the Browns. Really 2 of the last bastions of old fogey ownership. They and the Steelers, the Rooneys. Can't say the Bills anymore because the Wilson family sold it after, I believe, Mr. Wilson passed away. They sold it, so we can't really count the Bills anymore in that. But if you're to be taken seriously as a professional franchise, is 5 years really 5 years of one playoff appearance really the benchmark you want to set? Is that the example you want to set? And as I said, you ignore and do this before you honor Anquan Bolden. Again, let me read some of the quarterbacks again that were throwing balls to Anquan Bolden before you get into tizzy and say, well, they only played 2 more years for Arizona than Carson Palmer did. As I said, Kurt Warner, Jeff Blake, Josh McCown, Sean King, Matt Leinart, John Navarre. Oh, Tim Rattay. Sorry, I forgot about Tim Rattay. I don't get it. I really don't get it. And again, what are they going to do when Larry Fitzgerald hangs it up? What are you going to do? Rename the stadium after him? Nope, can't do that because that's sponsorship money. Larry Fitzgerald's not a brand. University of Phoenix is shilling out probably tens of millions a year to the Bidwells. At least the Bidwells will sell the naming rights to the stadium. You know, Mikey won't do that in Cincinnati. Could make 7 or 8, probably 8 figures a year by selling naming rights, and he won't do it because that would upset Daddy. Daddy wouldn't want it done like that. Paul Brown's not around anymore, Mike. It's time to get into the 21st century. But in either case, Congratulations to Carson Palmer. You are going in the Arizona Cardinals Ring of Honor. I don't get it. I don't know that a lot of people get it. But that's the benchmark the Arizona Cardinals are setting. If you have thoughts on this, let us know what you think. Follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Fumblegate. Drop us a line there. Comment here on the video and let us know what you think. On the Twitter, you can see going across the bottom of your screen. Follow the show at Fumblegate. Follow myself at Jason Griefer. It's my personal account. And follow Adam Kieft at Fumblegate Fatty. FumblegatePodcast at gmail.com. Congrats, Carson. And most of all, congrats, Arizona Cardinals. What a benchmark.